EA's Star Wars Battlefront 2 is the most disappointing piece of Star Wars media since The Phantom Menace, and considering that film's reputation, that's saying a lot.
I've been wondering, what are midichlorians?
Midichlorians are a microscopic life form that...
Stop! Stop it! Stop talking!
However, unlike The Phantom Menace, which disappointed die-hard fans for not being a carbon copy of the original trilogy, Battlefront 2 is disappointing because of its wasted potential, making it fit in perfectly with the majority of Disney's Star Wars content. Listen, I understand that I'm late to the party on this subject. This game came out in 2017, it turns 4 years old this year, and there are a ton of videos that discuss why this game was bad when it first came out. In the time between the initial launch and this video coming out, EA managed to patch it into a state where it was actually worth the $60 price tag. But before we can get into the subject of this video, we need to establish some history about the Battlefront series, Star Wars video games, and the expanded universe. Star Wars has always been a property that's a gold mine for all sorts of merchandise. Aside from the many flavors of toys, you have different forms of media that flesh out the universe, and each of these does it in a unique way. Books are able to tell different stories, with each author adding their own flair to the universe. Comics also do this, but have the advantage of being a visual medium which is more accessible to people. And shows have more freedom in order to be able to have memorable episode arcs and character development without having to be cut down to the standard 2.5-hour Star Wars film. But out of all of these, video games have the biggest advantage, as they are able to immerse you in the Star Wars universe in a way that none of these other mediums are able to do to the same extent. In true Star Wars fashion, a lot of these games will take an existing game type and do it with a Star Wars twist. So you'll have Star Wars versions of piloting sims, God of War, first-person shooters, and even games that came pre-installed on your Windows 95 computer.
Why are we still here? Just to suffer? Every night, I can feel my leg and my arm.
However, the games that are regarded as some of the best of what Star Wars had to offer was the Battlefront series. As you may have guessed, the Battlefront games are a Star Wars take on first-person shooters that present themselves as realistic depictions of warfare, such as Battlefield or Call of Duty. Out of the 5 original Battlefront games, the one that people love the most is the original Battlefront 2, which came out in 2005. When I was a kid, I would play the multiplayer mode all the time with a friend of mine, and now revisiting the game as an adult, I can understand why the game is so popular. Because the game takes place in multiple eras, you can experience a whole lot of the Star Wars universe, or at least how it was back in 2005. It's really cool to see all these characters that you recognize from the movies and the shows and the comics, and then be able to play as them in the game. Battlefront 2 is also well known for its campaign, and playing it all the way through for the first time I can understand why. Battlefront 2's campaign is told from the perspective of a clone in the 501st Legion, and is essentially a war journal that records all of the battles that he took part in, from the Battle of Geonosis to the Battle of Hoth. While a majority of the battles in the game are ones that take place in the movies, some of them are completely unique to the campaign, such as the Battle of Mustafar or the Clone Uprising. What I especially loved about the campaign was how small of a story it was when compared to something like the first 2 trilogies. There were a number of galaxy-changing events in the game, but you were never a driving force behind them. Instead, you were a normal soldier trying to survive these gigantic conflicts that reshaped the history of the galaxy. It's a type of story that Star Wars doesn't tap into often, but when it does, it handles it well for the most part. If you haven't played it before, I suggest picking it up and trying it for yourself. The campaign is fun, and even the fact that the game is dated by today's standards doesn't really detract from the experience. Then Disney happened. In 2012, Disney bought Lucasfilm, and by that link they got Star Wars as well. And 2 years later, they declared that all expanded universe material was now not canonical in the Star Wars universe. This means that pretty much every piece of Star Wars content except the 6 movies and Clone Wars were relegated to what would come to be called Star Wars Legends. The main reason behind this being that Disney wanted creative freedom in order to come up with their own Star Wars content. While I think it's depressing that all of this great Star Wars content is just sitting in the void waiting to be introduced, at best in a new form that improves on the original, at worst as fan service, I can understand why Disney made this decision. For all intents and purposes, the expanded universe was the Star Wars canon to many Star Wars fans, despite Lucas and Lucasfilm's stance on it. Many creators went in knowing that the only pieces of Star Wars media that were set in stone were the films, though this isn't always the case, and while Lucas was fine with people running around and doing their own thing with Star Wars in the expanded universe, he never considered what they made to be a part of Star Wars. In an interview in 2005, he went so far as to say that his films and the expanded universe were basically different universes, because while expanded universe creators would try to keep their stories consistent with Lucas's, many times they would go off in completely different directions. Against all odds though, some expanded universe materials managed to find their way into things like the prequels or Clone Wars. This was either because you had people like Filoni who grew up with the EU and worked with Lucas to add elements from it into the final product, or Lucas saw something he liked and decided to put it in his movie. That's why a handful of prominent Legends characters like Quinlan Vos, Aayla Secura, Delta Squad, and the Mandalorian Neo-Crusaders were able to survive the expanded universe getting nuked. While I don't care for Lucas's treatment of the expanded universe, especially because a good chunk of the Star Wars stuff I loved as a kid was from it, at the very least I respect Disney for taking a public stance on it. Now with a clean slate, Disney proceeded to start creating the next wave of Star Wars content, especially the types of content that would make them the most money. All of those video games, especially the Battlefront ones, were pretty successful, and with the combined allures of nostalgia and Star Wars, they'd be sure to make a ton of money off a new line of Star Wars games. So, in 2013, Disney decided to give an exclusive 10-year license to make Star Wars games to one lucky video game company. So who would they pick? id Software, Bethesda, Microsoft? I have no idea why Disney made this decision. Maybe they googled video game companies and selected the first company that was based in America. In all seriousness, the most likely reason as to why Disney partnered with them is because EA, above all else, is a video game publishing house. In many ways, it and Disney are pretty similar. Both of them are large corporations that own smaller brands that produce content, and when that content gets any praise or criticism, they're the ones that usually receive it.
You and I are not so different.
I'm not like you. You're a murderer.
Well, to each his own.
So, to start off the new wave of canon Star Wars games, EA made Battlefront 2015, which was criticized by fans of the original games. People were annoyed that it had no campaign, they were annoyed that it was restricted to the original trilogy, and they were annoyed that there was so little content available upon launch. So, EA took all those complaints and doubled down on them with Battlefront 2 2017.
I hope no one looks at my plans while I'm sleeping.
And because of this, the game caused even more outrage. But this time, it wasn't just fans of the original Battlefront games that were angry about this game. People were angry that there were loot boxes that made the game pay to win. They were angry that fan favorite characters were hidden behind enormous paywalls. And they were angry that there was limited content once again. And to make all of this worse, EA would make statement after statement after statement that just added fuel to the fire. Obviously, all of this has changed now since the game initially released, and a lot of YouTubers covered the game as it was pretty well if you'd like to get an idea of the initial reception to it. But thinking back to that time, the one thing that I don't really remember coming under fire was the game's campaign, but that may just be because I didn't look into it that much. The new Battlefront 2's campaign is focused on the Imperial Special Forces group known as Inferno Squadron, consisting of Del Meeko, the weapons specialist and the only likable member of the group, Gideon Hask, the loyal soldier and one-dimensional space Nazi, Iden Versio, the leader and combination of Meeko and Hask, and Iden's probe droid Dio, who has the ability to reference Jojo's bizarre adventure so forcefully it causes his enemies to die instantly. Counting the campaign DLC, the campaign takes place from just before the Battle of Endor to just before the start of The Last Jedi, and chronicles the fall of the Empire as well as the rise of the First Order. Now as I'm describing this to you, you probably think, hey, that sounds interesting. And based off the initial trailer, it looked like the campaign was going to be fantastic. It was going to chronicle this untold story of this new Imperial character, and maybe it would finally give us full answers on how the Empire became the First Order, since this came out at a time where people were still excited about the sequels and not nearly as negative about them.
I've waited 30 years for this. I still remember my last orders. The day the real war began.
Oh, by the way, almost everything in that trailer is straight up bullshit, but let's not worry about that. The only red flag at first was how short the campaign was. Not counting the DLC, it's only 6 hours, which is pretty short for a video game campaign. However, this didn't necessarily mean that the campaign was gonna suck. Undertale's campaign is only around 6 hours, and that game managed to create a unique story with tons of memorable characters, story beats, and music. Hell, the original Battlefront 2's campaign is only 7.5 hours long, and it's one of the most beloved Star Wars video game campaigns. So, is the new Battlefront 2's campaign awful? Shh! We haven't reached that part yet. Wait your turn. Anyways, let's just jump right into it and find out. Before we get into this section, I want to clarify that I won't be focusing on the gameplay too much unless it's important for a point I'm making. Oh, by the way, do you remember the Jimpressions video where Jim mentions that the campaign is a glitchy, barely playable mess? Well, EA may have added more content to the game since that video came out, but the campaign still has a ton of bugs, as we'll see throughout the video. The game starts us off in a rebel ship just before the Battle of Endor. Aiden got captured by rebels, and they're interrogating her in order to see if she has any important information about the upcoming battle. After they leave, we have a small segment where we get to play as Dio, where we have to make our way to the cell block in order to free Aiden. We then have to make our way to the communication center in order to erase a message that would have warned the rebels about the trap on Endor, which triggers the alarm system. This leads to us having to escape the ship while the entire crew chases after us. The first half of this level was entirely stealth-based, and pretty much the only time I was able to successfully sneak my way around. The stealth system in the game only really pays off when you're in small areas with plenty of cover, but the game mostly takes place in large, open battlefields where you have a pretty high chance of being spotted half a mile away due to limited cover, or the enemy AI actually working for once. Speaking of AI, if you enjoyed the AI from the original Battlefront 2 that even at the time was criticized for being clunky, don't worry, because this game has it in spades. We are then treated to one of the few legitimately cool moments from the game. After this, we have some friendly banter between Inferno Squadron before the campaign begins in earnest.
Today, the rebellion dies.
I want you to keep this in mind, because we're going to be talking about it later. After this level, we cut to the Battle of Endor, where Inferno Squadron has just reached the shield generator after the rebels blew it up. We are then informed by Aiden's dad, Admiral Versio, to pull out so we can help reinforce the Death Star since it's now unprotected. After a firefight with some troops that the rebels left behind to clean up, we then see this cutscene.
Look alive, agents. We can grieve later. Right now we need to move.
Now, I want you to keep Aiden's reaction in mind because it'll be important later. Pretty much the rest of the level is just Inferno Squad looking for TIE fighters in order to escape the planet, which then leads to a dogfighting segment where we have to protect our ship, the Corvus, while it fixes itself. As Cosmo of Variety Hour pointed out, these aerial segments are the only really fun battle moments in the game. After this, the rest of the squad leaves while we go and meet our dad. Admiral Versio lets us join a meeting with this messenger droid, who reveals that we are going to be assisting in Operation Cinder. The next 3 levels all relate to Operation Cinder. I'm going to be pretty much skimming the first one because it isn't as important as the other 2 are. In the next level, we head to Fondor in order to pick up satellites that will be used in Operation Cinder, only for the rebels to attack the shipyards pretty much as soon as we get there. The whole level consists of transitioning from a dogfighting segment to boarding the rebel ship in order to destroy its internal systems so the Star Destroyer that has the satellites can escape. This is a nice callback to similar missions from the original Battlefront 2, and I hope you enjoyed this level because this is the only time the game does this well. In the level after that, Inferno Squadron sends Miko to Pilio in order to destroy a storehouse that the Emperor has put on there. This is a neat callback to Legends because it was a recurring element for Palpatine to have these hidden stores of powerful antiques, which were usually Force artifacts. But, in a shocking twist of events, Luke Skywalker is also there looking for something. This level is probably my favorite out of the game because it's where the game actually thinks outside its own box and we get to do something different. Although the original Battlefront 2 allowed you to play as heroes during some of the missions, most of the time that was an optional choice that would assist your team, while here, playing as a hero progresses the campaign itself. It's pretty fun to run around and kick ass as Luke. The story for this level is also really good, as it revolves around Miko and Luke having to work together to defeat the local fauna in order to get to the storehouse. A protagonist and an antagonist working together for a similar goal isn't a unique story, but it's something that rarely happens in Star Wars, so it's cool to see in this format. I personally think that Luke's inclusion in this game works much better than his appearance in The Mandalorian does. In the context of The Mandalorian, Luke pretty much only shows up so he can claim Grogu as his student, but it's also an easy out for the writers to save the main cast from the corner that they've backed themselves into.
Everyone in this room is dead. But me and the child.
In the context of Battlefront 2, this encounter with Luke is used as character development for Miko. He's been questioning the Empire up until this point, and his encounter with Luke helps him to wonder if he's been fighting for the right side or not. There's this pretty interesting conversation that the two of them have throughout the course of this level. First, listen to this line that Miko says when they first meet each other.
I've heard 100 stories about the Jedi. They terrified me as a boy on Coruscant, but you...
And then listen to what Luke has to say when they discover that the vault's door can only be opened by the Force.
Why would the Emperor have a vault that can only be opened using the Force?
Why do you think?
You're telling me the man who destroyed the Jedi Order was secretly one of them?
No. I'm telling you that as a boy on Coruscant, you were frightened of the wrong thing.
At the end of the level, Luke and Miko part ways after Luke gets the artifact that he's been looking for, and leaves Miko with a choice.
I'm not blind. I know what the Empire is capable of, but... what else is there?
A choice?
The rebellion?
No. A choice to be better.
What I like about this scene is that Luke doesn't explicitly tell him to defect. He says that he can continue to work for the Empire, but he could choose to do it in a way that doesn't harm innocent people. Luke also asks him not to blow up the storehouse, because...
I won't stop you from destroying this vault. Wouldn't you say the Empire's done enough damage to innocent worlds?
I don't really get this, because removing any Imperial influence from the planet would be a good thing, but Miko decides to listen to him anyway. In the last of these three missions, we head to Aiden's home world of Vardos in order to get a high priority Imperial out of there. We also discover that those satellites from earlier have been set up around the entire planet, which leads to Aiden discovering the true purpose of Operation Cinder. And so, this is a good time to explain it to those who aren't familiar with it. Operation Cinder was a contingency plan created by Emperor Palpatine that was introduced in Star Wars Shattered Empire and the Aftermath books. The thinking behind this plan would be that if the Emperor was to die, it was most likely the Empire's fault, because Palpatine can never be responsible for his own actions. So, Operation Cinder would be the methodical process of cleansing the Empire of any impurities, with only the most loyal Imperials left standing. This was carried out in multiple ways. For example, with these satellites that cause freak storms that render a planet's surface uninhabitable. I really like this concept. I think it ties in perfectly to Palpatine's identity of someone who only values people if they are of use to him. And this would be a pretty huge culling of people and planets that he doesn't see as beneficial. Unfortunately, Operation Cinder is poorly implemented into the campaign because it is used as an excuse for Aiden to defect from the Empire. Targeting Vardos goes completely against the point of Operation Cinder, as Aiden says herself that the planet is completely loyal to the Empire. Later on we see that Naboo is targeted by the satellites, which was known to be a thorn in the Empire side in both canon and legends. So why not just take the satellites to a planet that has an Imperial presence, but is known for being rebellious, like Kashyyyk or something. Then Aiden would be justified in questioning this extreme measure, because while they would be taking out enemies, they'd also be putting civilians and their own troops in harm's way in the process. The Mandalorian used this idea really well with Migs Mayfeld to show why he defected from the Empire. We currently don't know that much about Mayfeld before Operation Cinder, so for all we know, he could have just been another faceless goon.
I wasn't a stormtrooper, wise ass.
Yeah, you say that. But Mayfeld is an interesting character because of how he changes after Operation Cinder takes place. Seeing his comrades and villagers that were only protecting their homes be casually slaughtered by his own commander at Burnin Khan turned him into a bitter, self-centered, disillusioned criminal. It's because of Bill Burr's performance and Rick Famuyiwa's writing that makes Mayfeld getting his revenge on Valen Hess and the Empire feel so satisfying. But more importantly, it feels like something that his character would actually do. Battlefront 2 actually had an advantage over The Mandalorian, as it could have shown why Aiden would want to desert the Empire and explore this throughout different levels. However, she has had little to no development up until this point. Therefore, there is no reason for us to be invested in her potentially deserting. So the writers have to use this extreme measure in order to give her a reason to leave. So, after that cutscene, we head down to Vardos in order to get that Imperial out of there, who turns out to be a character called Protectorate Gleb, one of the people that instructed Aiden and Hask while they were training to become Special Forces soldiers. She's also an alien, which is weird considering how canonically racist the Empire is, but there are much more glaring problems with this campaign, so I could not possibly care less about this fact. After retrieving Gleb, Miko and Aiden try to evacuate civilians on the Corvus, but Hask prevents them, telling them that it's against their orders. This is the scene where Inferno Squad breaks apart, with the pair deserting the Empire while Hask remains behind, which probably would be kind of emotional if it wasn't for the fact that I'm completely disconnected from the scene because none of it feels natural. Miko and Hask are completely believable in this situation. Miko has been shown to doubt the Empire earlier in the campaign, so it makes sense that he would want to desert when shown how far the Empire is willing to go. I also find it believable that Hask would feel conflicted about following orders due to his connection with his squad mates, but eventually choosing his loyalty to the Empire over them. The only one who isn't believable is Aiden, which is stupefying because she is supposed to be the protagonist of the campaign. Sure, we've had her question the Empire before the scene happens, but it's come off across as annoyance at the Empire being stupid, rather than actually having doubts about their alignment. She literally goes from a character who says stuff like this:
The Empire's time has come.
Today, the rebellion dies.
The Empire will assault at the very foundation of the rebels' pathetic belief in themselves. Tell me, Aiden, what is the source of their belief?
Hope.
To being fully prepared to desert the Empire, and it makes no sense because it was not established at all. The thing is, it would have been at least somewhat set up if Aiden had been the one to encounter Luke instead of Miko, but I guess that would have required some thought from the writers. I don't think I would be picking on this as much as I would if the game hadn't been marketed around having this untold story that needed to be shared with the world. Even if you're gonna go with saying, well, we've never had a story about an Imperial deserting the Empire before, to that I would say, the only way that this story would have been unique was if Inferno Squadron had stuck with the Empire until it transitioned into the First Order. A story that we have gotten bits and pieces of, but one that we have not seen from the beginning to end. Instead, we have a story based around an event so cliche that even Solo glossed over it for the most part. So, after that, Inferno Squad breaks up, leaving Hask behind. Aiden and Miko now have to try to get off the planet without being captured or shot down by the anti-aircraft batteries that are preventing civilians from escaping. This level is supposed to follow up on the emotions of the last cutscene. You are attempting to get off-world as the Empire is trying to hunt you down for deserting, while you're still questioning if you made the right decision as you are now forced to fight against the very people you once considered comrades. And the game treats this like nothing has changed whatsoever. Now, this isn't just a problem with this game's insipid campaign, but rather speaks to a greater problem in fiction as well. Desertion arcs are almost always handled poorly whenever they appear in stories, because they usually fail to capture a character's emotional conflict of having to turn against their former allies. Most of the time, these arcs are just "Oh yes, I love working with my comrades. They're so great. Oh no, it turns out they were the bad guys the whole time. So now I have no problems with killing them, despite our previous friendship." The only two pieces of media that I've seen that handles this competently are Avatar: The Last Airbender and She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. Zuko's redemption arc and eventual desertion of the Fire Nation isn't something that just comes out of nowhere, because it's established from the very first season. Even when he does eventually leave, it's not something he did lightly, because it meant he was turning his back on his girlfriend, his family, and his people in order to help Aang defeat the Fire Lord. In She-Ra, the focus is less on Adora's desertion of the Horde itself, but more on how it affected the people she left behind, and it's not something that goes away after a single episode. It's only after 3 of the show's 5 seasons that she stops feeling conflicted about betraying her former allies and comes to terms with her choice. Aiden and Miko's choice to desert the Empire doesn't affect the story whatsoever. The only thing that changed was that instead of shooting rebels, you're now shooting stormtroopers. Even during this level, Aiden doesn't act conflicted at all about fighting Imperial soldiers, which is something that did legitimately bother Miko.
I hated having to do that.
We've been sentenced to death. We protect ourselves or we die.
Yes.
Wow, you're a douche.
It honestly feels like they took all the writing that would have made Aiden's desertion believable and they just gave it all to Miko, because I legitimately do not care that Aiden made this choice at all. So, the level ends with him stealing an AT-AT, taking out the anti-aircraft guns, and having a quick skirmish with Imperials before escaping the planet. Afterwards, we have a quiet moment where Aiden and Miko weigh their options about what they should do next. For a brief moment, I thought the story would potentially go in a different direction for once. Maybe they would go off on their own, get away from the galactic civil war and do something original. Get their own farm world like Thanos and grow space papayas. Maybe start a family.
This is Aiden Versio of the Imperial Raider Corvus.
What the fuck? To give the writers credit, they didn't desert to the rebellion like how I thought they would. They just want to warn them about Operation Cinder and go on their way. Which is when the game decides to reward us for dealing with its bullshit for so long. I was almost ready to forgive the game for all its sins and give it a 10 out of 10 just for having Lando in it when this happened.
You really trust us to fight beside you?
What can I say? I'm a big believer in second chances.
Now, I find it believable that Lando would be willing to give them a second chance, considering that he got one of his own, but you are literally giving the benefit of the doubt to 2 highly trained Imperials, who for all you know, could be double agents. The only other thing of note in this section is that you get introduced to Shriv, who is probably my favorite character from this game, if only because he's just as critical of the campaign as I am. So after this, you go to Naboo to blow up the Operation Cinder satellites, before playing a ground section as Princess Leia where you have to fight Imperials until Miko can activate an EMP that will deactivate anything not inside the palace.
The Queen took precautions before the Clone War to keep Naboo safe from future invasions. An ion pulse that would disable any threat outside the palace.
Nice touch.
After this, Leia welcomes Inferno Squadron into the rebellion with open arms, which is arguably the stupidest thing she's ever done considering this game came out before this happened. I find it extremely hard to believe that the same person who loathes the Empire since, you know, they blew up her home world, would give Aiden and Miko the benefit of the doubt so easily. When Zuko finally joined up with Team Avatar, he wasn't accepted right away. It took him 5 episodes, almost the rest of the final season, for them to trust him fully. She-Ra does this as well, but to a much smaller extent. Again, this is nothing more than showing how the writers of this game don't care about writing a consistently good story. In the next level, we get to play as Han Solo, who is on Takodana looking for an Imperial deserter who has 2 pieces of important information for the rebellion. He also has a beard, because he had one in those Aftermath books. You spend the level looking for the informant, fighting stormtroopers, looking for one half of the data, fighting more stormtroopers, looking for the other half of the data, fighting even more stormtroopers, then taking off in the Millennium Falcon so we can blow up some TIE fighters and whatever type of ship this is. I think it's supposed to be the same type of ship that Moff Gideon has. Before continuing, I just want to point out something that I'm sure that those of you who are more observant will have noticed. The main reason why you're able to play as certain heroes in the campaign is because it's training for multiplayer. In fact, the whole campaign is just training for multiplayer. You even start out each level with a new loadout so that you'll know how to use these weapons in multiplayer. And the same goes for abilities as well. To be fair, this isn't exactly a new concept, as this is a common trait in many first-person shooters. Hell, you can even make the argument that the campaign of the original Battlefront 2 serves the same function. What I'm trying to say is that when the campaign starts to grate like how it is right now, this especially starts to make itself clear. Some of the stormtroopers I killed must have figured this out because the knowledge causes them to ascend into the heavens. Also, Dio got a new coat of paint and loves Shriv, but that's not really important. The next mission has Aiden and Miko head to Bespin so they can capture Hask, who is rumored to be on Chinook Station, a Tabana gas mining station like Cloud City. On the way there, they actually have some friendly banter, which means the two will probably hook up by the time the campaign ends. Some of the stormtroopers in the next section must have figured this out as well, because they also begin to transcend. Why does this keep happening? Did you guys actually playtest this thing? After landing on the station and fighting some Imperials, Aiden comes up with the brilliant and original idea of disguising themselves as stormtroopers in order to avoid detection.
Shut up! Oh my god, I don't care!
They then head up to the top of the platform where Hask is supposed to be. Now, considering we're at Bespin, the same planet that Cloud City is on, where there was a famous trap scene, I'm going to give you 10 seconds to figure out if this is a trap or not. Yes, of course it is. Turns out that Hask led us into a trap, where he finally washes his hands of Aiden and Miko.
If it were up to me, I'd deal with you personally. But I have responsibilities now. And taking care of you is no longer one of them. Goodbye, Aiden.
I hope you enjoyed that scene because it's the last time we see Hask as anything more than a one-dimensional villain. Hask has escaped at this point, and we now need to find a new way off Bespin. After escaping the top of the station, we have to fight our way through a horde of stormtroopers and an AT-ST in order to hijack a cloud car in order to escape the city, since our X-Wings are apparently too far away for us to go back and get. This is one of the most annoying sections of the game, and even though I played through the campaign on the lowest difficulty for the purposes of this video, it's still easy to get pinned down by heavy stormtroopers or the AT-ST and get huge chunks of your health taken away. What makes this section even more annoying is that you can bypass it entirely by just heading straight for the cloud car. You then get to blow up a refueling station that's servicing 3 Star Destroyers, which means they all blow up together. This section is honestly kind of hilarious because you are destroying 3 of the most well-known ships in Star Wars with arguably the dumbest ship ever created for the series. Also, there's a level where Lando and Shriv go to Sullust and blow up an Imperial factory by submerging it in lava. It's only really worth mentioning because the two of them play off each other really well. I would much rather be playing a game about just the two of them rather than this one.
It is imperative our presence remain undetected. Now get back to work.
If you're gonna shoot him, let's just get this over with.
The last big combat section of the game takes place during the Battle of Jakku. Inferno Squad is going around helping out rebels however they can, such as destroying a grounded Star Destroyer that's sending out bombers, or rescuing the crew of a downed ship from Imperial walkers. It's pretty much a level that alternates between dogfighting segments and ground battles, and it's a slog to get through. On their way back to the Corvus, we get ambushed by Hask, and we finally take him down. Aiden then spots Admiral Versio's ship and decides to go confront him for the last time. After boarding the ship and fighting her way through some stormtroopers, she finally reaches her father and they have their final confrontation together. I really like this scene because it reminds me of Luke's conversation with Miko earlier on. So in other words, that means that this section is actually well written. Even though Aiden offers her father the chance to leave, Admiral Versio refuses to leave his post, as he's given his entire life to the Empire, but he tells her that she still has the chance to start a new life. Aiden then dramatically runs through the ship in order to get to an escape pod. I guess this is supposed to be a powerful moment where we're supposed to reflect on the choices of these two characters, which would be fine, except up until this point their relationship can be summarized as, "I have daddy issues," and "I love my job too much." After landing, we meet up with the rest of Inferno Squadron, and then this happens.
Guys, I played this whole thing in one sitting, and I'm being 100% serious when I say that came out of fucking nowhere.
Yes, but actually no. The level ends with the rebel version of Infernal Squadron looking out over the wreckage of the Imperial fleet, with Aiden finally showing some form of emotion about the Empire's demise. The final level of the game takes us back to Pilio, where Kylo Ren and the First Order meet Gleb, who now leads their own Imperial remnant known as Janata Security. J-Sec managed to capture Miko and the Corvus, who returned to Pilio for some insane reason, and Ren wants to interrogate him for information about the map to Luke Skywalker, which I'm pretty sure is just the map to Octo that Luke presumably got from the old storehouse here. When Miko resists, Ren forces his way into his mind like how he does to other characters in Episode 7, and we see what happens when he does this. Ren chases Miko through his own memories, battling through illusions of enemies and even the original Inferno Squadron, eventually ending up back in the present. This is honestly a really cool idea for a level, and I wish the campaign had this level of creativity, but we're almost at the end so I won't dwell on that for too long. After Ren finishes his interrogation, this happens. Oh no, I'm so surprised that he survived. Villains always die in Star Wars. Apparently, Hask surviving his TIE Interceptor going down in a ball of flames only gave him a few scars, changed his hair color, and has him grimace in pretty much every cutscene he's in for the rest of the campaign. He gives some exposition about how Aiden and Miko deserting ruined his life before he shoots him.
You fucked up my face.
He then spouts some more exposition to Gleb. So that's it. The campaign's over. It's done. There isn't any more, right? They couldn't possibly continue the story any further, right? Right? I honestly wish the campaign had just ended on the Jakku level, or even on that cliffhanger, but EA decided that they needed to release 3 more levels in order to tie up the campaign's story. The Resurrection DLC was released along with a bunch of other Last Jedi content leading up to the film's release, and to EA's credit, I think all of this was free.
Thanks, Satan.
When I originally played the game, I was interested to see if this DLC would answer some questions about the sequels. Maybe it would make up for the game wasting the potential of having Inferno Squad be a part of the Empire's transition into the First Order. Now, did it? You gotta stop spoiling this, man. Some of these people have never played this game and don't know the answer. Also, older Aiden is a lot hotter than I remember.
Sector 4 needs reinforcements. We are being overrun. Repeat, we are...
Anyways, the DLC starts out with Aiden and her daughter Zay flying their X-Wings when Shriv contacts them. When they show up to the Corvus, it turns out that Shriv just found it abandoned on Pilio while he was investigating something called Project Resurrection. He found no sign of Miko or the crew, but when he checked the ship's logs, he discovered that Miko had recently visited a planet called Athula, and the trio decided to go there in order to see if they have any answers. When they arrive, it turns out that Miko had been investigating J-Sec kidnapping families from the planet in order to sell them into slavery. And what do you know? A J-Sec fleet shows up in order to gather more. This leads to a dogfight where we destroy the escort fighters, shoot some other ships, destroy the main ship's engines, and have a boss fight with some rando and a Naboo starfighter. After the fight, we learn from the crew of the main ship that J-Sec's forces are based on Vardos, Aiden's ruined homeworld. After arriving on Vardos, Aiden and Shriv leave Zay on the Corvus so they can head to the main building in order to kill Gleb. And the game acknowledges Starkiller Base destroying the New Republic real quick. Aiden and Shriv finally get inside the building, only to discover that someone's killed Gleb for us.
Well. How the turntables...
Hask then reveals that J-Sec has been abducting children for the First Order, so that they can be raised to become the next generation of stormtroopers. But now the First Order has grown large enough that they no longer require their assistance. Now this actually ties into plot points from The Force Awakens and does confirm some things hinted about their origins.
Like all of them, I was taken from a family I'll never know.
Kidnapping children.
Rescuing. And
raised to do one thing.
My men are exceptionally trained, programmed from birth.
Forging them into an army the likes of which this galaxy has never seen.
So I give the writers kudos for that.
Thanks, Satan.
Too bad that doesn't really balance out with all the dumb stuff that they've done. Hask then goes on a monologue about how Aiden and Miko broke apart the family of Inferno Squadron, and by killing Miko, he's finally starting to get his revenge. Then he shoots down the Corvus. To the DLC's credit, this scene does feel like it has some weight to it, but it's not that much because the main game did so little to set up Inferno Squadron's dynamic. Aiden and Hask had a friendly rivalry going on for like a scene, and Aiden and Del interact just enough for me to pretend that their marriage was believable, but the trio doesn't have enough chemistry for it to have any impact when they fall apart. And by extension, this scene doesn't have any real weight to it. I don't know, maybe the book that takes place before all of this explains this more and makes the group's relationship more believable. I love having to read secondary materials in order to explain major plot points. Ironically, the Rebel and Resistance versions of Inferno Squad feel like they're a team because they actually interact and have dialogue with one another. This is also because Aiden doesn't act like an emotionless robot like how she did for half of the original campaign. A good example of this is Dio getting named. Dio isn't actually named in the main campaign, as Aiden usually refers to him as Droid.
Droid, go!
This relatively small change in character actually makes her more likable, even though it isn't much. This is honestly kind of frustrating because Aiden only really feels like she starts to have a personality after deserting from the Empire, and only now feels like a real character thanks to the DLC. Like the writers had to overcompensate for her feeling like a cliche action movie protagonist for that first half of the game. Now, just to be clear, I do not blame Aiden's actress for this. If you watch interviews and other promotional material that she did, it's very clear that Yelena Gavankar is very passionate about the role and the character that she plays. It's clear that this is the fault of the writers, who created a campaign where she does not have a good character to play. This honestly frustrates me, because they could have used the freedom that a video game campaign has in order to make her story stand out and be unique, but given EA's mindset about first-person, single-player campaigns at the time, this doesn't surprise me. For convenience's sake, Hask doesn't decide to kill us then and there, but sends us off to be interrogated by the First Order for information about the Resistance. However, J6 didn't take too kindly to the First Order killing their leader. So Aiden and Shriv are able to escape as the two factions start fighting each other. The pair go through the city, fighting off stormtroopers and JSEC troops while trying to see if Zay was able to get off the Corvus in an escape pod before it crashed. This section is pretty tedious, as we have to search for two separate escape pods, with Zay not being at either site and actually being holed up somewhere else. The only saving grace is that you can use AT-RTs in this section to help deal with scout walkers and ground troops. After the final shootout, we meet up with Zay and discuss our options. Aiden wants to get revenge on Hask for killing Miko, but Zay and Shriv convince her that it's a bad idea. And instead, the trio decide to board Hask's Star Destroyer in order to get some information on the First Order for the Resistance. So the trio decide to steal some TIE fighters and join with the rest of Hask's forces as they're pulling out. Also, Shriv makes Aiden and Zay official members of the Resistance, but it really doesn't matter. The trio get discovered pretty quickly and have to find a way onto the ship fast in order to avoid being shot out of the sky, so they enter the ship from behind. After getting on board the ship, Shriv fucks off while Aiden and Zay head to the ship's information center. Stealth is possible in this section, but I don't care because I just want the game to be over. It is there that they discover that Project Resurrection was, in fact, a movement that had the First Order kidnapping children so that they could be raised to become stormtroopers. Which is something that we already fucking knew. It also turns out that the First Order has a gigantic fleet, but since this is never a factor in any of the sequel films, it's pretty much a pointless addition. This is also where the campaign completely loses me by showing us the schematics for a First Order dreadnought, which Aiden says that they need to get to the Resistance in order to show them how to defeat it. Yes, because I really think that the Resistance wouldn't be able to figure out that its weakness is the giant fucking hole in the center of it. It's because of stuff like this that I hate this whole campaign so much. It does nothing but regurgitate stuff that we already know about Star Wars. The campaign only exists to act as training wheels for the multiplayer. Why create a unique story when we can just repeat information that most fans would already know if they bothered to pick up a fucking book?
Do you understand how much this pisses me off? They really threw away the idea of a unique campaign and story in favor of regurgitating stuff we already fucking do!
I gotta wrap this video up. I feel like I'm gonna break something if I don't. Aiden and Zay decided to destroy the ship's hyperdrive in order to pull it out of hyperspace for who knows what reason, really.
Until the ship's out of hyperspace, we're not going anywhere.
I got a plan for that.
I don't care.
So, while Shriv looks for a ship that we can escape in, we fight through a ton of stormtroopers in order to get to the hyperdrive generators, where we have to defend Zay from swarms of enemies while she sets charges. This section is pretty annoying because unlike with the level where we play as Leia, we don't have a shield that we can use in order to cheese this. So I kept having to stop what I was doing and come by and kill the one enemy that was causing Zay to stop what she was doing and shoot at them. Aiden and Zay then head to the backup generator in order to blow that up too, where Hask confronts us for the final time. Yeah, Hask was such a big villain that he deserves such an over-the-top death. So we get out of the room, we blow up the generators, the ship comes out of hyperspace within sight of Starkiller Base for some reason, and Aiden is dying? I mean, she must have gotten shot during that last scene, but I don't remember seeing it happen. So Aiden is dying, and she's having her last conversation with her daughter, and it's supposed to be very emotional, but I just keep thinking of that shitty meme I made about this scene a few years ago.
We fight so others can live. And if we die, it better be for the same reason. You understand? I love you. I love you. I wish you could see what I was.
Rest in peace, Aiden Versio. You were painfully underwritten and had the potential to be so much more than the shallow cliche you ended up being. The DLC ends with Zay and Shriv giving the information about the Dreadnought to the Resistance and meeting Leia, before she asks them to head into the Outer Rim in order to gather allies for the Resistance for the upcoming war. And now the nightmare is over and I can finally end this fucking video.
Disappointment in the game of life!
So that's it. That's the whole campaign. I don't have some grand statement about it, except I'm probably even more disappointed by it than when I played it through for the first time. Talking about wasted potential in Star Wars is a pretty common topic, especially these days, but I think Battlefront 2's campaign really goes to show you why this is. The characters are barely fleshed out beyond simple cliches, character arcs are either poorly written or missing entirely, and the emotional moments don't hit as hard as they should in the campaign. It's clear that EA only cared about having this game be a multiplayer-focused, microtransaction cash cow and tacked on the campaign as an afterthought. And that's a real shame, because the writers wasted the opportunity of giving us an actual, untold story in favor of a safe, predictable one. Oh, by the way, I finally took a look at what these two have actually worked on before this game's campaign. Apparently, Mitch Dyer is a former IGN editor, while Walt Williams previously worked on things like BioShock, Civilization, Borderlands, Mafia, The Darkness, and Spec Ops: The Line. And based off the quality of the writing here, I pray that those games have better stories than this one does. I'm sure these two aren't the only ones responsible for how poorly the game's story turned out, so I don't know, maybe some Reddit detective can tell me about this in the comments. Now this is the part where I would talk about how EA needs to learn from their mistakes and figure out how to write a good campaign, but since I'm late to the party, they already did. Fallen Order is a massive improvement over this game. The characters are interesting, well written, and have engaging arcs within the story. The emotional moments hit with the punch they need, and Cal Kestis is a character that stands on his own and has a unique journey within the Star Wars universe. However, it is unfair for me to compare these two. Fallen Order is a single-player focused game, while Battlefront 2 is multiplayer focused. The campaign is really secondary to Battlefront 2, while the campaign is the full game for Fallen Order. So, I'm going to talk about Star Wars Squadrons. Squadrons is a multiplayer focused game like Battlefront 2, yet its campaign is superior. It's like Squadrons took all the problems with Battlefront 2's campaign and improved on them drastically. You don't really have a character in this game, unlike with Battlefront 2, and instead you play as a mute, customizable protagonist who is used as a vehicle to explore the game's story. The game's campaign follows two opposing starfighter squadrons, Vanguard Squadron and Titan Squadron. The campaign is built around a character-focused narrative and follows both sides equally. The most prominent characters are your commanders, Lyndon Javes of the Rebellion and Teresa Carroll of the Empire. Both of these characters have a deep personal conflict, as Carroll was Javes' protege before he defected to the Rebellion, following the destruction of Alderaan, when he was ordered to fire on innocent civilians who managed to escape the planet's destruction, leaving her behind to deal with the consequences of letting him escape. This conflict is the focus of the campaign, as it shows how both Javes regrets leaving Carroll behind and how embittered Carroll has become because of her mentor's betrayal, and how both of them come to terms with it by the end of the story. And I haven't even mentioned the other pilots in the squadrons. In Vanguard Squadron you have Grace, the daughter of Imperial shipbuilders who defected to the Rebellion despite her parents, Frisk, a former con artist who joined the Rebellion in order to escape a death mark that was placed on him after conning the wrong Imperial official, Kao, a former racer with some connection to the Force, and Gunny, the squad leader who will not shut up about the planet Mimban. And in Titan Squadron you have Sol, a loyalist who believes that reforming the Imperial Senate is the best way to ensure the Empire's survival, Von Reg, a pilot who is transformed into a psychopath after losing anyone close to her in skirmishes with the Rebellion, Shen, a man who has been shot down so many times that he is more man than machine thanks to the cybernetics that keep him alive. And finally, you have Gray, your squad leader who values order above all else. I could talk about some of the other things that I liked about this game, like the other supporting characters, the story, and some of the cameos, but I really want people to play this game rather than hear me talk about it, and I've spoiled enough about it as it is. Needless to say, all of these characters have unique personalities and character traits, and it would be hard to imagine the game without them. I know that Gray starred in that Hunted CGI short that EA put out before the game's release, and if other content based around these characters exists, I would gladly check it out. The game did a good job at making these characters interesting enough that I want to see them in other things. Compare that to Inferno Squadron. Why would I want to check out material about any of these characters? There's nothing about them in the game that would make me want to learn more about them. If you have to rely on this secondary material to flesh these characters out, that's a pretty big red flag that you're doing something wrong with a thing that is supposed to act as a hook to get people interested in these characters. Squadron's campaign is only a few hours longer than Battlefront 2's, but it looks like these few extra hours really helped it in the long run, while Battlefront 2's shorter campaign shot it in the foot. I would recommend either of these games over Battlefront 2 for their own reasons. Fallen Order has the superior campaign out of the three, but Squadrons has a much better campaign for a multiplayer game than Battlefront 2 does. The only reason why I would recommend this game to someone is because of the multiplayer modes. To close the video out, I just want to say that to me, the most disappointing thing about this game is how it's pretty much vanished from canon altogether. Aside from that tie-in novel I mentioned earlier, as well as some references in other media, Inferno Squadron hasn't appeared in any other canon materials. It makes the aspects of this game that are legitimately good even more depressing to me, because the chances that we'll see any of the characters introduced by this game in anything else in Star Wars is practically zero. Hell, Star Wars forgot about Dios so quickly that they made another Dio. I want to hope that we'll see some of these characters again, but with much better Star Wars content continuing to come out, I highly doubt it. I know that this is a depressing note to go out on, but I'm glad that I finally got to talk about this game. I'll give the game this: if it didn't turn out as badly as it did, I don't think Fallen Order or Squadrons would have come out the same, because Battlefront 2 seems to be a learning experience for EA. Am I saying that these games are only good because they came out after Battlefront 2? We'll have to wait and see. Maybe EA has learned their lesson, but I'm not willing to hold my breath, and neither was Disney, go figure. At the very least, the good parts of the campaign show us glimpses of what could have been, but unfortunately, that's all they'll ever be.